As far as I can tell, there's two types of responsibility, or maybe it's more accurate to say there's two layers of responsibility. The first is the responsibility of doing what's expected of you, what a normal person would do in any given situation. The second is the responsibility of doing what is required to handle the situation, regardless of anything else. Let's call the first layer generic responsibility and the second final responsibility. Here's an example. Let's say your house is on fire. What would a normie say your responsibility is? Well, 1, to get out of the house. 2, if possible, bring other people inside out of the house too, but not if the fire is too big. And 3, calling the fire department. What's the responsibility of the firefighter? To put the fire out. From the normie perspective, you, as a regular person, do not have the responsibility of ultimately stopping the fire, or even undertaking huge risks to save others. Your responsibility is to stand clear and alert the authorities. That's it. Now let's say the house fire spreads and destroys other people's homes. Assuming that you didn't start the fire yourself, and assuming that you got yourself and your family out and then called the fire department, nobody reasonable would consider you responsible for the disaster, even though you didn't chip in and physically fight the fire yourself. But they might hold the firefighter responsible for the spread if he was negligent in his duties. After you've called the fire department, your main responsibility is fulfilled, but the firefighter has to handle the situation. There's nobody he can call, no higher authority he can appeal to. He's the authority. He's the one who has to do the job. Of course, he can call for backup if he needs it, but it's the difference between somebody's responsibility being to alert the authorities and somebody's responsibility being to handle the situation. A regular person might yell for Superman to come save him, but there is nobody for Superman to yell at himself. He has to do the job of saving. For you to have generic responsibility, final responsibility has to be vested somewhere else outside of you. After all, you can't call the authorities if there's no authority to call. And of course, this arrangement applies to more than just house fires. When we were children, this sometimes made sense. We all remember a situation where we had to appeal to our parents to be a decision maker, rather than work something out ourselves. We all remember being told not to fight bullies, but get a teacher instead. But as you get older, this logic starts to sound off. Don't own guns, just call the cops. Don't try to fix your stuff, just buy new stuff. Don't risk it all and open a business, just collect a paycheck from somebody else. Don't go through the headache of purchasing property, just rent it. Don't have final responsibility for your life, just settle for generic responsibility. Like a lot of stuff we talk about on this channel, it's obvious where this paradigm applies to leftoids, but that doesn't mean that rightoids are immune to it. Every time a traditionalist or a religious person makes an appeal to culture or God, there's a good chance they're putting themselves in the same position. The authority they appeal to doesn't have to be a person. All it has to do is bind your reasoning such that you end up neutering your own sense of responsibility. If you ever catch yourself saying, "I'm not responsible for what I'm doing, it's God or the state or my traditions or my family," you are in this boat. It seems to me that part of becoming an adult means taking up the mantle of final responsibility, at least in some domains of your life. It means understanding that, at least sometimes, there's no greater authority to appeal to. You need to solve the problem, when it happens, with whatever you have on hand. And there's nobody coming in to save you. It can't be God, it can't be your parents, it can't be the state. It has to be you. And embracing final responsibility will require you to oppose all of those things in a non-trivial way at least once in your life. Final responsibility means being the first dissenter at the moment it's the most dangerous. In the face of all this, I'm not surprised that there are people who actively try to remain subservient so that they have a lesser level of responsibility for their own life. You can derisively call these people adult infants, but I think everybody's felt that drive at least once, during some exceptionally weak moment, where you would give almost anything to have that burden lifted. If you're saying you've never felt that, you're lying. I want you to keep all of this in mind as we go over a few things. I want you to see the philosophical through line between the stuff I'm about to show you. This image went viral last year. It was a flash in the pan thing, too mucho texto to actually last, but maybe you remember it. If we want to address mental health, we need to dig deeper. And then the shovel of intersectional social justice digs through the surface layers of medical model, pharma, DSM, pathologization, and individualism, don't worry, we'll come back to that, into the lower chamber of floating buzzwords like violence, inequality, discrimination, poverty, racism, injustice, and so on. And of course, all of these things can obviously majorly contribute to mental health problems, don't kid yourself. But despite that, it also seems to be the case that there's a huge correlation between socialism and degenerating mental health. And socialists absolutely shit themselves in rage when you point it out. But it's true. There's a study called Mental Illness and the Left, which shows that there's a weak association between mental illness and political ideology, with that association growing stronger for the extremely left wing of politics. The results hold up in regressions that adjust for age, sex, and race. Figure 1 shows leftism positively correlated with the diagnosis of depression, BPD, bipolar, and schizophrenia. Figure 3 shows leftism positively correlated with receiving professional treatment for any mental health problem. It also shows extreme leftism as the only demographic where more men seek help than women. Figure 5 shows rightism positively correlated with happiness. However, the only truly unhappy group were extremely leftist men. Extremely leftist women are about as happy as center-leftist and centrist people, but with a wider possible range up and down. It is also interesting to note that on almost all of this data, mental health also deteriorates on the extremely rightist end of the scale, but not nearly to the extent as it does in the left. And despite their deterioration, extremely rightist people are the happiest of them all. People on the left like to cast this as capitalism's fault. Rise in US suicides highlights need for new depression drugs. We're depressed because we're overworked, underpaid, can't afford our student debt, can't afford a doctor, can't afford a home, can't afford a family, while the people at the top take most of the value of our labor for themselves. We don't need better drugs, we need a better economy. I was actually on board with you until you said people at the top take most of the value of our labor for themselves, champ. Yeah, the ability to actually do the life-affirming things that most humans need to do, like start a family or have a happy home, is slipping away. But I'm less likely to pin that on liberal capitalism than I am on the you'll own nothing and you'll be happy commie crowd. Moreover, these people are scumfucks for trying to say, wow, mental illness is because you don't have socialism. Who's surprised that these sleazeballs are trying to co-opt yet another thing? But yeah, apparently individualism is an impediment to good mental health, from the Prague point of view. To any sane person who understands that humans aren't actually ants, knows that anybody who wants to strip you of your individuality is your enemy. That's the first goal of any cult, and doing so is certainly a fast track to crazy town. Let's look at the mindsets of the people who actually believe this stuff. The reason you want to be self-reliant so fucking badly is because capitalism has made your relationship with other people competitive and draining as shit. It's forcing you into incelhood. That's, quite the leap of logic, isn't it? Self-reliance is problematic because capitalism? Listen, if you're not the personality type that finds competition invigorating rather than draining, that's fine, but you're not all people. Defining and addressing toxic masculinity. Common traits: mental and physical toughness, aggression, stoicism or not displaying emotion, heterosexism, self-sufficiency, and emotional sensitivity. Self-sufficiency is also toxic masculinity as well, apparently, as well as the traits of stoicism and toughness, both things that any sane human would understand are virtues. These are traits required for responsibility and success. You're not grinding, you're being exploited for your labor. Listen, when your tweet goes viral, you get a maximum of 1 shoutout below it, not fucking 50. But no, I fundamentally reject the idea that employment must be exploitative. Hell, I work for myself. Who's exploiting me? As it turns out, these people just don't like self-employment. Small businesses are overrated. We shouldn't fetishize mom and pops. They offer lower wages, skimpier benefits, and inferior labor protections. Okay, so you guys hate the corpos and their monopolies, fair enough. But you also hate people who are trying to build up real competition to them, or create a more locally focused business model, or break out of the wage cage and work for themselves. Check out his justification. Small businesses pay lower wages, provide worse benefits, are often exempt from important worker protections, and are incompatible with the way unionization works in the US. Oh, okay. So it's because small businesses, being smaller than a giant corporation, don't have the deep pockets to pay for all the shit that you like, even as you whine about having to work for them. Got it. The person who works for themselves rather than simply collecting a wage is by definition more self-sufficient. In their situation, there's no larger authority to appeal to, no boss whose responsibility it is to fix the problem. The entrepreneur is the authority. He has to be the fixer. For a worker, maybe you get a dressing down if you make a mistake. Maybe you lose your job, and that's no joke. But to the small business owner, they lose their job and all of the labor they've invested in building the business if they don't keep it running. It's not the same level of responsibility. During last year's riots, we saw a lot of stories from business owners like this one. Watching looters bust down our family restaurant is heartbreaking. Senseless. They're doing it while laughing and smirking. Not gonna lie, I damn near shot a man tonight. He threw that fucking rock at my family photo and looked right at me. I said, "You motherfucker," tears immediately rolling down my face. I just can't no more. I'm thankful I walked away, but fuck y'all. To that demographic of people who would rather work in a business that they themselves own rather than collect a paycheck at somebody else's establishment, their businesses aren't just places of employment, but extensions of the self. You can understand why they react this way. They value self-sufficiency, and the violence of the left takes it from them. You can also understand why progs just don't get it, and say nonsense like, "LOL, you're insured, don't worry about it." It's never been about the insurance. You can have garbage takes like, "How can you value property over human lives?" But the truth is, people will always be willing to defend what's theirs. Socialists like to talk about workers owning their labor, but that's largely just misdirection. If you were to ever actually talk to a socialist long enough about it, you'd eventually reach a point where you say, owning my labor means that I own it exclusively. I own it and nobody else does, and it goes where I want. I can trade it, or spend it, or keep it to myself as I see fit. And they almost always inevitably say something like, well, workers don't actually own their labor personally. Production is not a matter of personal rights. It should be controlled by all. If your production is controlled by all, then it's not controlled by you. Have you noticed yet what strings all of these things together? It's the rejection of self-sufficiency, and with it, the appeal to the authority and responsibility of the group. It's the demand that you stop being responsible for fixing your own problems, and that your responsibility ends with standing back and alerting the authorities. Don't defend your stuff. If anybody, the police should do that. Don't worry about damages. Let the insurance company handle it. Don't work for yourself. That puts you out of our grasp. It's almost like they worship weakness, because they understand that their ideology requires that weakness to function. And I don't think I'm being hyperbolic when I say that. Sure, there's no shortage of dumb takes by dumb people who are so fucking weak that I'm dumbfounded they can even get by in life. These people are fragile, hateful, spiteful, wrathful, prideful, jealous, vapid, intemperate, anti-moral, and just plain stupid. Rather than confront their pathologies, they would rather see society itself pathologized, so they don't have to feel as bad about being so genuinely awful. And yes, they literally worship weakness. The more unique and heroic and special the strong are, the more the weak outnumber them. The last man beats the first man, that's why he's the last man. You're going to continue to perceive your society degenerating into what you see as chaos and entropy and ruin. I don't have to do anything. Nobody has to do anything. It'll just happen. Your kids will grow up to be more like me than you no matter what you do. Weakness wins because weakness is by definition easier and more common. My whole politics is preaching the gospel of weakness, and it's winning. Cruel Leonidas demanded that you stand. I ask only that you kneel. From Xerxes in 300. Well, yeah, this, but unironically. This speech, of course, comes out of Arthur Chu, whose only claim to fame was being world-class at Jeopardy back in 2014. He's been riding that high ever since, and his devotion to nihilism cost him his marriage in 2017. Being a master at something like Jeopardy takes a lot of hard work. I guess Arthur just found it easier to degenerate and live the bare minimum. But that is what a lot of the more prominent socialists require of the rest of us for their lifestyles to continue. They need the Arthur Chus of the world to buy into their own weakness. They need those people to indulge in their vices to the point that self-control, self-sufficiency, and self-respect become alien concepts to them. They need a civilization of weak, angry, shallow, unrefined people who are willing to listen to them unthinkingly. And as long as they tell those people that their issues are external, not internal, as long as they can keep pointing at some villain as the source of the world's problems, as long as they can keep encouraging them to avoid looking at their own deficiencies, the money will just keep rolling in. Of course, I'm here making money off my content and my audience too, and I'm also pointing the finger at some particularly unscrupulous people. But I'm not going to sugarcoat anything for you. If you have problems in your life, a lot of them can probably be solved or at least eased by properly engaging with them. That's not something that I can do for you, and donating your money to me won't help. I do, of course, appreciate the donations, but that's why I always say you should do it only when you're financially stable. A lot of the videos I've released recently have all been leading up to this point. Why does the purity spiral come for everyone is a discussion on the nature of that weak, angry, shallow, unrefined mob that breadtubers and others have cultivated, and how after getting rich off of them, they now fear their own audiences, and have been appealing to some greater responsibility in order to lessen their own. The private life is a discussion on how the Marxist and the fascist both desire to make the private public, the personal political, leaving no room for individualism. To these people, nothing can ever be exclusively yours, and everything is within the purview of the collective. There is no self-sufficiency. You are a part of them. Trigger warnings don't work, as well as yesterday's accessibility video, are discussions on how the progressive cures for weakness actually create more weakness in people, how this weakness is fostered as if producing it is actually their goal, and how strength is vilified because the strong have no need for their indoctrination disguised as help. The thread connecting everything is the vilification of self-sufficiency. Here's another meme that's been floating around for a while. Wait, not the Mucho Texto one. This one says the same thing, but it's actually readable. Hard to swallow pills. A lot of y'all confuse capitalism with growing up and having adult responsibilities. This is the truth. Everybody thought they were going to be a teenager forever, or at the very least they would grow up to live in the socialist paradise, and now that they're not, now that they're out in the world and discovering they don't have any tools to actually deal with it, they would rather blame reality itself rather than getting to work on their own lives. It's easier to resent competence than it is to become competent. These people actually think that rather than taking on responsibility themselves, this is a problem better solved with more bureaucracy and more reshuffling of responsibility. I once had an argument with a particularly stupid commie on an old Twitter account, so I unfortunately can't show you the tweets like I usually do. I mentioned that people often work hard and store resources away in preparation for a rainy day, and he actually said that under a socialist society, there would be no more rainy days to prepare for. They believe their ideology is so all-encompassing, so all-powerful, that preparation for future random circumstances is not only unnecessary, but evidence that you're a counter-revolutionary element for your lack of belief in the system and your individualistic, privatistic hoarding of resources resources away from the collective. Unfortunately for them, no amount of government policy can replace the feeling that you actually matter to other people, or that your life has a purpose. You cannot outsource your humanity to the collectives so that you no longer carry the responsibility of developing into a moral, functional, well-rounded adult. It is the fulfillment of responsibility, not its alleviation to some other agent, that provides meaning. Taking all of this into account, self-sufficiency must be vilified by the progressive and the socialist. Self-respect is poison to the politics of victimhood. Hence, the person who has self-respect must either be a bigot if part of the majority, or filled with self-hatred if not. Self-reliance is the opposite of dependency, and socialism only works if everybody fully buys into and therefore is dependent on the socialist system. Hence, the person who's prepared is detested by the socialist, with the socialist calling him a hoarder, a kulak, a subversive element. The act of preparation is the very definition of prioritizing the self over the collective, of delinking yourself from dependency, of ridding yourself of weakness. The people who are directly incentivized in seeing you weak will say something like, dependency creates cohesion, cohesion leads to solidarity, enough planning will fulfill all demand, stop thinking about it. The existence of an independent person is an affront to everything they stand for, and every step you take towards self-sufficiency, no matter how big or small, whether that's running your own business, or growing your own food, or engaging in local trade, it all flies in the face of any sort of grand reordering of society, or large-scale redistribution effort. Owning your labor might mean that you sell it to a capitalist, and maybe you even get exploited in that process. But the flip side is, it absolutely means that the communists don't get to give it to other people freely. I'm not saying you have to completely de-link from society and live as a mountain man. We derive meaning not only from self-sufficiency, but also from consensual connection with others. But the key word there is consensual. I consent to being close with my friends. I don't consent to being close with everybody. As liberals, we have that choice. There will be times where it's better for us to buy into society and reap its benefits. There will be times where it's better to go it alone and be the masters of our lives. But we make the choice, not anybody else. However, for the socialist, there is no choice. They have to worship weakness, because weak people are the fuel for their engine. They have to despise self-sufficiency, because the more individualistic you are, the more you de-link from their dependency. They have to reject final responsibility for their lives, because it's the only way they can cope with being such massive fucking failures. And if you let them, they'll drag you down too. Alright guys, that about does it for me. Thanks for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. A lot of the videos I've been making the past couple weeks have definitely led up to this one. I don't know if I'll continue down this road, maybe, maybe not. There's many things I want to talk about. As always, tune into Game Boomers tonight for more Halloween fun. I'll see you there. I love you.